We cannot forget the war in Ukraine. Let's check in now with Joseph Lindsley. And Joseph, as you know, the big headline in the United States, the White House says Ukraine funding will run out soon without congressional approval. I imagine that is topic number one where you are.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Bob, good afternoon. Yes, it is one of the key topics here. I'm in Lviv now. I returned here yesterday after a couple months traveling around the country. It's cold. It's about 25 degrees, or it was when I was out running a couple hours ago through the snow. We have heat and electricity. And once again, another day has passed, another night has passed without major Russian missile attacks throughout Ukraine. But as is fairly common, we had this sort of the dance macabre of these menacing Iranian drones prowling around Ukraine throughout the night. They were here in the western parts of the country. None of them reached cities, and they were taken out by air defense. But we are in this phase of, while Russia is not attacking in a major way far away from the front, they are testing, they are poking, they're up to something with these drones. Meanwhile, as we look at this, indeed, the White House officials, especially the Office of Management and Budget, saying, saying that we are, quote, out of money and nearly out of time to provide more weapons to Ukraine. And this is interesting. This was a warning issued yesterday by Shalanda Young, the director of the White House's Office of Management and Budget. And she went on further to say that if Congress does not provide additional funding, we would, quote, kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield, not only putting at risk the gains Ukraine has made, but increasing the likelihood of Russian military victories. And there's something strange about these words and the timing of this announcement. And I have to, as looking at it, I think it's either astoundingly tone deaf, or perhaps whoever is writing these statements does not want Ukraine to win, because we see a couple weeks ago, right before Thanksgiving, 3 Republican congressmen, led by Michael McCaul, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, they issued a report, a short report, but very clear, saying that the Biden administration has actually not been helping Ukraine. They actually have been appeasing Putin. And this report was titled a plan for victory in Ukraine, proposed plan for victory in Ukraine. Notably, I have not seen any major media mention this plan, even though it's the signed authors of it are the 3 of the most powerful chairmen in the House of Representatives, also Mike Rogers of the House Armed Services Committee and Mike Turner of the Intel Committee. And in this document, they're saying that, sure, yes, the administration has spent money on Ukraine and on supposedly projects working for Ukrainian victory in the U.S., money that was allocated by Congress. But what Michael McCaul, representative from Texas, what he says is that the Biden administration has failed to, A, define what victory is, and B, to get the weapons to Ukraine that are actually needed for victory on time. And so we have a dissonance here, and I think it'd be helpful if the press could hold all sides to account to figure out what really is going on. But as Michael McCaul said, the Abrams tanks, Congress gave the funding and the permission, and these are old tanks. It's not new stuff. Much of the funding is so the United States can buy new equipment to replace the old things being sent to Ukraine, which, by the way, this is stuff that the Defense Department would be wanting to buy anyway, but this is a good excuse to get a fresh set of equipment. But, for example, the Abrams tanks were promised long ago, earlier in 2023, and they didn't arrive until mid-September, after the counteroffensive had begun. Why? What's the point in sending them after the fighting? The same goes for the ATACMS, these long-range ballistic missiles. And as Michael McCaul pointed out in his report, only a smattering have been sent to Ukraine. Of the few that have been sent, Ukrainians have used them extremely effectively. We can point to clear successes that they've been able to destroy many Russian helicopters and airplanes with these long-range weapons. But once they're sent, there's no follow-up. There's no talk of it whatsoever. And it's strange when you read this report from the White House Office of Management and Budget that, they say, oh, we just need more money for Ukraine. And they don't say why or how, and they don't talk precisely about weapons. And, when I ask the question if they're tone deaf, because they have to know that the Republican opposition, because most of the opposition to Ukraine comes from Republicans, that they are extremely skeptical when they hear figures like 100 billion. And they hear that, and then they read sort of the propaganda that they think Ukraine is somehow not winning, and of course they're going to question it. And if the White House is not precise in saying how this money will be spent and how much of it actually goes to American defense contractors and goes to American military, well, then of course people are going to be skeptical and ask questions. And so I think, everyone I speak with here, whether it's soldiers, they're texting from the trenches, or people here in Lviv or Kyiv or on the trains, they look at this as there's a madness outside of Ukraine in these capitals, and the people are failing to be honest. And as I think, Bob, about my experiences working, I started my career at the Weekly Standard, the people that pushed for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I went on to work at Fox News and the high chambers of power in Washington and New York. And I think very often there's not some grand conspiracy. I don't even know if those ever really exist. Well, what is more common is you have groups of people, they gather together, they reinforce each other's ideas, and they become sort of entrenched in the mindset of the most powerful personalities in their group. They start to question that less and less, and then they can no longer distinguish what fake from fact, and they only have their form of the reality, which they pursue. And we see this at the extreme example with Putin. How separate he is from even his advisors. Sitting at that huge table away from everyone. He's the extreme example. But we see that in Washington too. And I think if you look at the statement from the Office of Management and Budget, it's like as though it's written in a vacuum. That they're not actually in conversation with other people in Washington. And as long as we're operating like that, it's going to be hard to figure out how we can actually stand up to someone as powerful and committed to evil and destruction as Moscow, as Tehran, as Hamas, and Beijing.
Also, as important as I know you believe what's going on in Israel is, it must be frustrating because everything that's going on with the war in Ukraine has taken a back seat as our attention is focused on Israel and Hamas now.
Yeah, it's frustrating and really inexplicable, because when I speak with my friends and old colleagues in Israel, when they're under fire, there's still rockets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Many of them are mobilized. They're dealing with this in a very intense way, and they have the space in their brains and their hearts and minds to care and understand about Ukraine. And they also realize how these things are connected. The same goes for people here in Ukraine. They care and they pay attention to what's happening in Israel, even while they're in the trenches, even while their cities are being attacked by drones. So why is it that people in Washington and London and Paris and newsrooms and in Capitol buildings with all of the resources and money in the world, why they cannot pay attention to these things at the same time? Because meanwhile, as we can clearly see, because they've not been trying to hide it, officials in the Kremlin and Hamas officials based not in Gaza, but in Qatar in luxury, and the officials in Tehran, they see the connection and they see it very clearly. It seems that the only people who don't see the connection are those people in power in the West.
Well said. Let me end on a upbeat note. Text from one of our listeners. I thought Joseph Lindsley would like to know that a prominent architect, Marianne Cosado, from the Notre Dame School of Architecture, visited Poland and Kyiv and Kharkiv in Ukraine, meeting with international architects to study replacement housing in the Ukraine area after the war. She was the only American architect to attend and was the creator of the Katrina Cottage housing after Hurricane Katrina in the United States. That's from Matt. And as a Notre Damer, you're probably happy to hear that. And I was fascinated by this. So already there is post-war planning, huh?
Well, even as we've seen, within days of buildings being attacked in cities, there's rebuilding happening. So the rebuilding is ongoing. And I'm pleased to hear that there's an architect from the Notre Dame School of Architecture, because that school is very grounded in this idea of tradition and community and building communities that are not governed by the automobiles so that people can be connected with each other. And, Ukraine has that architecture natively. And that's why the society is so strong in many ways. But there has been a concern that when big developers come in with money, that they'll just develop Ukraine in sort of the American suburban style. But I do know people that are very vigilant against that. And so I'm happy to hear that this architect from the Notre Dame School is here to help Ukraine build with a Ukrainian soul and not with some other identity.
That's your school, Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. We'll check in with you tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав?
Well, which side are you on? На чиїй ти стороні? Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чиїй ти стороні?